This is where mythology gets as taboo and explicit as possible, so listener be warned. But it is also some of the most important mythology to understand as it cuts to the core of the creation myth itself. This is also a complex pattern that I want to emphasize from every angle, to show how consistent it is and to help people learn and remember it thoroughly. And thus it will be a long video. By the end of the first half of the video, the main argument will be clear. The second half of the video will drive the point home and show how any objection can be countered. Very few people I ask seem to know more than perhaps one narrative myth belonging to the Vedic god who bears the name Dyaus Pitar. There seems to me to be a serious problem of people talking about the god Dyosh, or using concepts related to him, but not knowing who he is. Perhaps they have heard that Dyosh marries Earth, or that he is divided from Earth somehow. They might know family members of his, but family relations are not narrative mythemes, the real bread and butter of comparativism, and are less helpful since family relationships are known to shift even within individual mythological branches, and even more between distinct branches. It seems to me that the myths of Zeus are sometimes imagined to have belonged to Vedic Dyaus as well at some point, due to the fact that the two gods share the root of their names. But that Dyaus and Zeus actually share their core essence, have a shared mythic and theological origin, is so far only an assumption. We have to try to first understand Vedic Dyaus on his own terms, and only then to establish the Proto-Indo-European mythos associated with him from that basis. Only then can we judge whether Dyaus is really a direct match of Zeus, or if the name was a movable title on some level, whether Zeus and Dyaus might be distinct gods at their core, each one having been given their nearly identical names in their respective branches by a simple divergence in naming conventions, or even if a deeper theology that might govern the inheritance of such names from one god type to another might have been at play. If we can achieve a careful distinction between Dyaus and Zeus, mythically speaking, we also have to ask whether Odin, on the other hand, has any overlap with actual narrative myths of Vedic Dyaus, or if he only shares some of the very general prerogatives of sky sovereignty, while lacking the core mythic shared origin with Dyaus. In sum, we have to ask, before we claim Zeus, Odin, or any other god are true parallels of Vedic Dyaus, do we actually know who Vedic Dyaus is? How clear is our picture of him? Can we narrate one narrative myth of his that isn't just a family relationship? How about two? Do you know Dyaus? We must see Vedic Dyaus for himself, without combining him with Zeus or any other god in our mind via the assumption that they originate in the same god, mythically speaking. Despite some admitted mythic overlap, the shared mythic origin of Dyaus and Zeus hasn't been proven, and there are many reasons to doubt their exact equivalence, as comparative scholars such as Dumasil, Nick Allen, and many others have repeatedly done. Dumasil proclaiming him primarily Mitraic, in line with the god Mitra, as I also have, and Allen claiming Zeus must have only inherited the name and some roles from the Proto-Indo-European Dyaus archetype, who he claims was equivalent to Greek Uranos. Sky would then be equivalent to sky, Dyaus to Uranos, while the name Zeus would be something that has been passed down to the god now known as Zeus, as he inherits so many other things from the sovereigns who rule before him. Zeus is characteristically the inheriting sovereign, the sovereign who is born after the primordial creation moment and famously swallows certain of his predecessors. To inherit is his specific Mitraic theology, as I have shown in my articles. As for the question of the Norse creation myth, two popular theories block the way of attaining a clearer picture of its narrative. Firstly, this idea that Odin, like Zeus, comes from some shared origin mythos with Vedic Dyaus. And secondly, the idea that Ymir matches the Vedic Purusha. In turn, two simple points could be brought as death blows to the idea that Odin is Dyaus or that Ymir is Purusha. Dyaus is the sky or heavens themselves, which Odin is not, but which Ymir is. And second, the Purusha is said to be all that is or ever will be in the Purusha Sukta, even all immortal and transcendent things, while Ymir is only the sky, the heavens, the earth, and nothing beyond. These points are almost insurmountable evidence that Odin isn't actually equal to Vedic Dyaus, and Ymir is not equal to Vedic Purusha. And the argument could end with these points in all fairness. However, many objections and loopholes will tend to be raised at the mention of these facts, and these objections will be held onto until the full picture of Dyaus is filled in and all the evidence can be brought into the light. Thus we will not stop with these two simple points, as once you begin looking at the picture from the true angle for once, an entire catalog of details line up to show. Unless there is a great exception, only the sky itself can be the sky itself. Odin and Zeus are not the sky itself, while Dyaus is the sky and heavens themselves. So what really is Dyaus of the Vedas, the god who is the sky itself? Let's finally get to know him in detail after perhaps having an incomplete understanding of him for so long. First, Dyaus is presented as a duality with Prithvi, the earth, significantly more than appearing as a singular god. In the Rig Veda itself, Dyaus is most commonly presented as a part of a unity of sky and earth, which is essentially a double being or pseudo-hermaphrodite called Dyavaprithivi. This name combining the names Dyaus and Prithvi, sky and earth, into one compound name, thus meaning sky-earth or heaven-earth. The double being Dyavaprithivi is thus the default form that Dyaus appears in the Rig Veda. The union of Dyaus and Prithvi, sky and earth, called Dyavaprithivi, is not only a marriage, but is so united that it acts and is referred to as one double being with a single compound name, and the fact that Dyavaprithivi is indeed treated as one double being in the Rig Veda is driven home by the fact that the genders even switch occasionally between the two halves. Sometimes Dyaus is paradoxically described as feminine. Sometimes Prithvi, the earth, is said to rain down with her clouds. Renowned Vedic scholar Arthur Anthony MacDonald summarizes the way Dyaus and Dyavaprithivi are most often presented in the Veda. Quote, "By far the most frequent use of Dyaus is as a designation of the concrete sky, in which sense it occurs at least 500 times in the Rig Veda." Unquote. Thus Dyaus is the concrete sky. Quote, "When personified as the god of heaven, Dyaus is generally coupled with earth in the dual compound Dyavaprithivi, the universal parents. No single hymn of the Rig Veda is addressed to Dyaus alone. When he is mentioned separately, the personification is limited almost entirely to the idea of paternity." Unquote. MacDonald counts about 13 instances where Dyaus is mentioned alone, and about 50 others where his role as a father is his only prominent feature, and so concludes that, quote, "Thus it appears that Dyaus is seldom mentioned independently, and in only 1/6 of over 90 passages is his paternity not expressly stated or implied by association with Prithvi." Unquote. Quote, "As a father, he is most often thought of in combination with earth as a mother. This is indicated by the fact that his name forms a dual compound with that of Prithvi oftener than it is used alone in the singular, that in a large proportion of its occurrences in the singular, it is accompanied by the name of Prithvi, and that when regarded separately, he is not sufficiently individualized to have a hymn dedicated to his praise, though in conjunction with Prithvi, he is celebrated in 6. In about 20 passages, the word Dyosh is feminine, sometimes even when personified." Unquote. MacDonald continues by describing, quote, "Dyavaprithivi, heaven and earth, the pair which to early thought appeared so indissolubly connected in nature that the myth of their conjugal union is found widely diffused among primitive peoples. In the Rig Veda itself, this couple is so closely associated that while they are invoked as a pair in 6 hymns, not one is devoted to the praise of Dyosh alone, and only one of 3 verses to that of Prithvi. So hard was it for the poets to dissociate the two that even in this hymn, Prithvi is praised for sending the rain of heaven from her cloud." Rig Veda 5.84.3. The dual compound, moreover, occurs much more frequently than the name of Dyosh as a god. It occurs, including the comparatively rare synonyms Dyavaksama and Dyavabhumi, about 100 times, or more frequently than the name of any other pair. Heaven and earth are also called Rodasi, the 2 worlds, spoken of as sisters, 1.185.5, owing to the gender of the word, an expression occurring at least 100 times in the Rig Veda. Unquote. MacDonald concludes that, quote, "Heaven and earth never attained to a living personification or importance in worship." Unquote. I will repeat that as this summary shows, the double being Dyavaprithivi is the default form that Dyosh appears in the Rig Veda by far. The default form. Is this fact ever given the recognition it deserves in the public discourse regarding Dyosh? Let's look more closely at the extant myths of Dyosh and see what they tell us. In one of his only myths, Dyosh rapes his daughter, and then Rudra shoots Dyosh with a lightning arrow, violently separating Dyosh from his daughter during the act, and Dyosh inseminates the earth with his fallen seed. This may be the most important myth of Dyosh, though it is not widely known and is told only cryptically in the Rig Veda. We will cite and look at this myth in detail later in the video. Another myth is Dyosh's general division from Earth, apparently being propped and held apart from Earth by one god or another, often Indra or Varuna. Because there does not seem to be any myth in the European branches where an Indra-type god divides Earth and sky, let alone both an Indra and Varuna, we are already forced to choose which Vedic variant of the division of Earth and sky is the true parallel of the Earth-sky divisions found in European myths. We have Indra, Varuna, or Vishnu dividing earth and sky, Purusha being sacrificed with part of him making earth and sky, and Dyosh being divided from his daughter by Rudra while inseminating earth. And so we cannot simply look at a line in the Vedas saying, earth and sky were divided by Indra, or the head of the Purusha became sky and his feet became earth, and presume that this is the correct variant that matches what we see in the Western traditions. We have to find which of these Vedic myths goes to the same root as what we see in the West. To do so, we have to look much more closely at the contextual narrative details of each variant. For now, we will note one crucial detail common to these variants. The outcome of the marriage of sky and earth in the Vedas is always that it is divided by another god. It does not remain undisturbed. As such, Odin's marriage to Jorth, earth, does not fit the description of the marriage of Dyosh and Prithvi, lacking its most prominent narrative event. If there is no union in the primordial moment, which is also violently divided to make the world, it is very unlikely we are dealing with Dyavaprithivi. Instead, the marriage of Odin to Earth appears to be that between the inheriting Varuna-type sky sovereign to the land as its king, steward, and rainbringer, but certainly not as its primordial spouse and fused other half who is divided from it. Another archaic myth belonging to Dyosh that we can reconstruct based on 3 to 4 parallels is that he cries blood when a son dies. This mytheme, in some form, belongs to the incarnation of Dyaus, that is, Bhishma, to Zeus, and to the Irish Dagda. It seems to belong to one other figure, and that is Guyomars, or Guyomard, in Iranic tradition. Guyomar being the consensus Iranic parallel of Ymir. The passage runs as follows. In grief, Zeus, quote, sheds bloody raindrops, unquote, just before his son and the incarnation of the archaic father sky, Sarpedon, is killed. Quote, howbeit he, Zeus, shed bloody raindrops on the earth, shewing honor to his dear son, his own son, whom Patroclus was about to slay in the deep-soiled land of Troy, far from his native land, unquote. Iliad 16.459. Guyomars likewise cries for his son's death and finds his face to be covered in blood, implying tears of blood or tears mixed with blood. Quote, when the king, Guyomars, heard of his son's death, his world darkened with sorrow. He descended from the throne, weeping and beating his head, and scoring his royal flesh in an agony of distress. His face was smeared with blood, his heart was in mourning, and his days were filled with sorrow. Unquote. When Bhishma, the incarnation of Dyaus in the Mahabharata, is appointed as marshal, a bloody, dirty rain appears in a clear sky, accompanied by other fearsome portents. This again reminding us of when Zeus sends down bloody raindrops for his own son who is about to die. And finally, when Kermite, son of the Dagda, dies, the Dagda is said to cry tears of blood for him. We know that the Dagda has other father sky roles, such as the punishing of the Irish Prometheus, Corgend, and the paternity of the dawn, Brigid, the fire god, Aidh, and the horse twin-type god, Angus. Thus, all combined, we can deduce that shedding tears of blood for a dead or about to die son belonged to the archaic Father Sky mythos, and probably connected to his role as giver of rain, with the idea that his tears of blood were pictured to fall like rain from the sky, as the Greek version emphasizes. Next, crucially, the ancestors of humans are born from Dyaus's seed that falls to earth when he is divided from raping his female half by Rudra Agni. We will come back to the parallels of this myth, but for now we will note that this specific event is paralleled by Greek Uranos, Phrygian Agdistis, Welsh Matholach, and Iranic Guyomard again, who all similarly give rise to the ancestors of humans born from their bodily fluids after being attacked and divided in some sense. The ancestors that arise from their bodily fluids often take the form of tree beings or plant beings, with the Iranic version emphasizing that their essence is both fire and plant, while the Vedic version calls them only fire in essence. Notably, during the Vedic myth, the seed of Dyaus falls to the ground where it is engulfed in flames and marks the site of the sacrifice. Thus, the attack of Rudra upon the raping father Dyaus creates and marks the primordial sacrifice in some sense. Dyavaprithivi is said to be made as a house by Tvastar Prajapati, that is, Prajapati in his craftsman aspect, who is also known as Visvakarman. Tvastar and Visvakarman are two names of the craftsman god Prajapati, the lord of generation. In Rig Veda 1.160.4 and 4.56.3, it is observed by a poet that he who produced heaven and earth, Dyaus and Prithvi, must have been the most skillful artisan of all the gods, pointing to Visvakarman, the cosmic artisan, an aspect of Prajapati. In Rigveda 10.81.2 and compare Atharvaveda 12.1.60, we read that, quote, Visvakarman produced them, unquote. Rigveda 10.110.9 says that, quote, they received their forms from Tvastar. Tvastar and Visvakarman are two titles identified with one Prajapati in his function as the cosmic craftsman. As already noted, Dyosh is crucially the sky itself, not just a sovereign of the sky. His name is the word for the sky or heavens, as likewise is the name Uranos in the Greek tradition, and as Ymir's skull is the only thing called the sky in Norse myth, and is the primary skaldic kenning for the sky itself. Now let's go through the narrative of the Vedic myth of Dyaus raping his daughter and being divided from her by Rudra Agni, and compare it to other branches in detail. Rigveda 10.61 tells the long version of this myth, but doesn't give the name of the father who is raping his daughter and is interrupted by Vastoshpati, a form of Rudra. Rigveda 1.71.5, on the other hand, tells a shorter version of the same myth, with the same key details, but makes it clearer that this is Father Sky, Dyosh specifically, who is the rapist of his daughter, and who is shot by the archer, implied to be Rudra Agni. Father Heaven is indicated in this hymn by the words Pitra, meaning father, and Div, which is simply the dative case of the word Dyosh, meaning heaven, as it is normally translated. It is evidently the scholarly consensus that these two Rigveda hymns, 1.71 and 10.61, refer to one and the same myth, as MacDonald, Cramrish, Jameson, and Brereton all agree. Of Rigveda 10.61, where the father is not named, Brereton and Jameson say that the verses, quote, treat the shocking story of heaven's incest with his daughter, Dawn. This is a favorite myth of the Middle Vedic period. See Jameson 1991, page 294-96. But nowhere is it as graphically if fragmentarily treated as it is here. She finally escapes, verse 8, but before this happens, some of his semen is spilled on the ground, verse 7. Indeed, on the ritual ground, verse 6. From this semen the ritual fire is fashioned, verse 7 and 9. Thus the rape of heaven's daughter is depicted as brutal. It results in the creation of the central ritual substance, as so often around the world in myths of cosmic rape and incest, the taboo sexual encounter is primally creative, unquote. Here are three major translations of the short version found in Rigveda 1.71, verse 5. First, Jameson and Brereton, quote, when he, that is Agni, made the sap, i.e. semen, for great Father Heaven, noting the caresses he stealthily crept up on him. The archer boldly loosed a missile at him when the god placed his spark in his own daughter, unquote. Here is T.H. Griffith's translation, quote, when man poured juice to heaven, the mighty Father, he knew and freed himself from close embracement. The archer boldly shot at him his arrow, and the god threw his splendor on his daughter. Here is Sri Aurobindo's translation. When he had made this sap of essence for the great Father Heaven, he came slipping downward, one close in touch, having knowledge. The archer loosed violently on him his arrow of lightning, but the god set the flaming energy in his own daughter, unquote. 2 lines later, Rigveda 1.71.8 continues the same myth, but specifies in another grammatical case that this is indeed Dyar, heaven, who is the rapist, Dyar being the nominative case form of Dyosh. The Padapatha version of the text just simplifies this word to Dyah at this point. Indeed, Dyar, Dyah, and Dyosh are simply different forms of the very same word, the given forms merely influenced by the surrounding words and basic grammatical conventions, as Div is the same name in a different grammatical case. This verse also describes how the flaming seed of Dyosh engenders the fire youths, the Angirasas, who are the ancestors of the early humans. Brereton and Jameson translate the verse as, quote, "When the missile's sharp point reached the Lord of Men, Agni, for him to release it, heaven, at that moment of contact, released the blazing semen poured out. Agni engendered the faultless young troop of good intention, the Angirases, and sweetened it." Unquote. The longer but more cryptic version of the myth begins with, quote, "Here is a Rudrian formulation right to the point," unquote, indicating the centrality of Rudra to the myth. It then narrates the shocking scene with the unnamed father raping his daughter, the daughter running away unhappily when the act is interrupted. Quote, "He whose penis, which performs the virile work, stretched out, discharging the semen, that one, the manly one, then pulled away his penis, which had been attending on her. Again he tears out from the maiden, his daughter, what had been brought to bear on her, he, the unassailable. When what was to be done was at its middle, at the encounter, when the father was making love to the young girl. As they were going apart, the two left behind a little semen sprinkled down on the back and in the womb of the well-performed sacrifice. When the father sprang on his own daughter, he, uniting with her, poured down his semen upon the earth. The gods, very concerned, begat the sacred formulation, and they fashioned out of it the lord of the dwelling place, Vastoshpati, protector of the commandments. Like a bull in a contest, he threw off foam. Heedless, she went away, hither and yon. Twisting away, she hastened like the gift cow on foot. The father said, Now those caresses of mine have not grasped her. Right away, like a chariot horse, came the trampling of the offspring, that is, Agni and the fire youth ancestors. And he took his seat at the udder, as one naked in the cold takes a seat close to the fire. Right away they hastened anew to the fellowship of the maiden, and to the semen, which was like a bounty, which is just truth, your blazing legacy." Unquote. Stella Cromresh, in her book The Presence of Shiva, summarizes this myth as, quote, "The appalling hunter who aims against nature, against the primordial act of Father Heaven, that he as Agni had instigated, against procreation, by which mankind was to come about." Unquote. And she explains how Vastoshpati is but another form of Rudra, given form in the middle of the myth. She then specifically distinguishes the father sky in this hymn from the Prajapati variation of the myth that appears in later Brahmanas, in which, quote, "Father Heaven, henceforth acting under the name of Prajapati, Lord of Generation, desired his daughter, Ushas, the dawn. She became a female antelope." Unquote. She emphasizes that this act, as the hymn states, is the paradigm of the sacrifice, and the fallen seed of Dyaus marks the site of the primordial sacrifice. Quote, "The father makes love to the daughter. Suddenly he pulls back, his seed falls down to earth, the place of sacrifice." Rigveda 10.61.5-7. In their concern, the gods created a poem, a word of power, Brahman, and out of this they gave shape to Vastoshpati, the guardian of the dwelling, the guardian of sacred order, Vratapa. Rigveda 10.61.7. Like a raging bull did the father foam, running this way and that way, and away with scant understanding. Like one rejected, she sped south. Rigveda 10.61.8. Unquote. She explains, quote, "Creation is an act of violence that infringes upon the uncreate, the undifferentiated wholeness that is before the beginning of things. And yet another act of violence is hinted at, and this act is kept secret in these wild and portentous mantras. He, that is Rudra, is implied, for it is he who is invoked in this hymn. He, the most powerful, who with the arrow in his hand hit the target." Rigveda 10.61.3. The father was made to pull back from the creative act that was to be prevented or undone by him, yet led to the existence of life on earth. without revealing their source, sparks of meaning flare up intense brevity in the Raudra Brahman, a hymn to Agni, the fire. The aforementioned Rigveda 1.71 sheds light on his nature, whose name the Raudra Brahman withholds. This hymn celebrates Agni, who had prepared the seed for Father Heaven, but when Agni noticed the lust of the father for his daughter, this hunter crept along, then boldly shot his arrow at the father just when he was quenching his desire in his daughter. The hunter had aimed at the creative act itself. Father Heaven shed his seed. It fell to earth. Agni, the fire, brought to life the father's progeny, the benevolent host of immaculate fire youths. Rigveda 1.71.5 and 8. Unquote. Quote, fire is a hunter. The flame creeps along, lashes out. It hits the victim with its dart. The arrow of Agni strikes the father in his passionate embrace of his daughter. But Agni's heat had also ripened the seed in the father. Foaming in hot fury when he is struck by the fiery arrow, the father spills his seed on the earth, the site of sacrifice, where it will sprout in the splendor of the immaculate and benevolent fire youths, the host of the Angirases, Agni's priests. Unquote. These fire youths, as we have said, are then the first ancestors of the early humans. Cromrish explains the true motive of Rudra attacking Dyaus thus, quote, the wild god defends the uncreate, the transcendental integrity before the beginning of things. Agni Rudra was outraged. He aimed his arrow of fire at the father, not because it is his daughter with whom he has intercourse, but because it is the substance itself of the uncreate that he is spending into procreation. Rudra acted as guardian and avenger of the uncreate and metaphysical wholeness. Agni is the guardian of Rita, of cosmic order in creation and of human life lived in accordance with it. Though one in nature, Agni and Rudra face in opposite directions. Agni's concern is the life of man, and Rudra's concern is man's freedom from the contingencies of life, his reintegration into the absolute as it was and is from before creation. The seed had fallen to earth, the place of sacrifice, whence man and gods, by means of the sacrifice, ascend to heaven. The wild hunter in the pre-cosmic wilderness is Rudra. In the form of their poem, A Magic Creation, Brahman, the gods give shape to him as Vastoshpati. The Vastu, house, that he guards is the cosmos. The site that is his domain is the site of the sacrifice. The sacred order of the cosmos is enacted on the site of the sacrifice in the rhythm of rites and hymns. They are analogous to the rhythms that pervade the cosmos. Unquote. Brereton and Jameson, in the very intro to their now standard edition of the Rig Veda, indeed are clear that heaven, specifically meaning Dyaus, rapes his daughter. This is indisputable in the repeated naming of Dyaus in Rig Veda 1.71 as Div and Dyar. They also specifically distinguish these Vedic hymns from the variant myth where the Father Heaven is apparently replaced by and conflated with Prajapati in the later Brahmanas. Quote, a less beneficent aspect of heaven's fatherhood is found in a myth obliquely but vividly referred to a few times in the Rig Veda, 1.71.5 and 8, and 10.61.5 through 7. And told more clearly in Vedic prose, that is the Brahmanas, though with Prajapati substituting for heaven, namely his rape of his own daughter. Unquote. We see then that Jameson and Brereton consider Prajapati to, quote, substitute, unquote, for Dyaus in the Brahmanas version of this myth. Thus, Rudra Agni attacks Dyaus while he is raping his daughter in the Rig Veda, thereby dividing sky from a likely feminine aspect of himself. As Cromrish explains, this feminine aspect called his daughter, who could here be earth or dawn, Prithvi or Ushas, or a different internal feminine aspect altogether. Arthur Anthony MacDonald believes the daughter is probably earth, due to Earth being the most frequently mentioned goddess with Dyaus in the Vedas, and based on his recognition of the fact that the default form of Dyaus is the double being Dyavaprithivi, in which the nominal relationship between the sky and earth halves is often changed. Also, there is the fact that the earth is the only goddess who is mentioned by name in the Vedic hymn, and this earth goddess specifically receives the semen of Dyaus produced in the act of rape that falls to earth when they are separated at this point. Numerous other scholars believe the daughter is Ushas, Dawn, primarily because Dawn is the most well-known daughter of Dyaus, and because this myth gets conflated with the Prajapati myth in the Brahmanas, where the daughter appears as Dawn. But in the Rig Veda, the daughter is not named. Kramrish interprets it thus, quote, Ushas, Dawn, appeared before Father Heaven as the dawn of a first morning. Father Heaven covered this blushing maiden, part of himself, discernible and other from himself, only to be united with himself. They are not two persons, but one self-begotten, begetting entity. Before Ushas appeared, she was in the Father. Now the Father is in her. Their mythical sex contact is of a kind that the Aitareya Brahmana, in another context, assigns even to the human condition when it speaks of the son who mounts his mother and his sister. Aitareya Brahmana 7.13, unquote. Seeing merit in both of these readings, my own interpretation is that both Earth and Dawn, or a different feminine emanation, may be present here as two nominal female aspects internal to the double being Dyavaprithivi. Within the double Dyavaprithivi, the union of sky and earth, is the Dawn goddess, the nascent daughter of Dyaus, discernible but not yet fully distinct from him, as Kramrish says, because at this moment earth and sky has not been split. The world has not yet been made, and so time and material differentiation has not begun. Dyaus technically rapes this daughter, which is his own unborn female aspect, as Kramrish explains, and the semen from this act also explicitly falls into the womb of Earth, Prithvi, the other goddess present, as the hymn states, quote, As they were going apart, the two left behind a little semen, sprinkled down on the back and in the womb of the well-performed sacrifice. When the father sprang on his own daughter, he, uniting with her, poured down his semen upon the earth. Unquote. Thus, while the unnamed daughter is raped, it is Earth, Prithvi, who nonetheless most clearly receives a portion of the semen when the rape is interrupted by Rudra. These females could indeed be projections of one and the same goddess, but they also may be two divine feminine aspects that receive the lust and the seed of Dyaus in the primordial act, one of them describing the beautiful female aspect toward which his lust is directed, and the other being the earthly womb that receives the fallen semen. The mystery of the earth goddess and the unnamed daughter here should not stop us from seeing that the Dyaus rape myth parallels the myth of Greek Uranos, sky, raping Gaia, earth, with no second female present in that case, and being separated from her by the Rudra-type god Kronos, especially since Dyaus inseminates earth as he is being separated from his daughter, who may be internal to him. In the Greek version, Gaia is the mother of Uranos, the sky, just as the earth goddess Spandarmad, who receives the semen of Guyomard, is the mother of Guyomard. Thus, the Greek version is an excellent parallel of the Dyaus and Guyomard myths, except that the two females seen in the Vedic version have been simplified to one goddess, Gaia, Mother Earth, in the Greek version. Whether Dyaus rapes the internal unborn dawn goddess, or this daughter is simply an emanation of the earth goddess, his female half, it cannot be denied that Dyaus is here attacked by Rudra Agni during a primordial rape, and that earth is also inseminated in this moment, with the fallen seed of Dyaus bringing forth the first ancestors of humans in a fiery form. It should not confuse us that Agni is mentioned as the archer in the short version of this myth in Rigveda 1.71. Since any time a frightening, unnamed archer is mentioned in the Vedas, it is generally a form of Rudra, and any time Agni acts as an archer, he is generally acting as a form of Rudra. Additionally, the 10.61 hymn announces with its first line that this is a Rudrian myth that is being told, even if the poet is afraid to utter the name of that terrible god. Indeed, it is made clear in the Vedic texts that esoterically Rudra is Agni, and so this mysterious archer can be no other than Rudra Agni. Stella Kramrish explains that, quote, Agni acts in Rudra, and Rudra exceeds him in intensity. He is Agni's incandescence. The connection of Rudra and Agni circles a point of identity. Agni is Rudra. This homology, stated again and again in sacred scripture, Rigveda 1.27.10, 2.1.6, 3.2.5, 4.3.1, 8.6.3, Taittiriya Samhita 1.3.14.1, 1.5.1.1, 2.6.6.6, etc., Mahabharata 3.218.27, is one of nature, not of person. Inasmuch as his nature is that of fire, Rudra is Agni. Indeed, Rudra is Agni and Agni is Rudra. Taittiriya Samhita 2.2.10.4, 3.5.5.2, 5.5.74, compare Mahabharata 13.146, 1 through 2. They are one in nature, though not in intensity. Rudra is the terrible, frightening, quintessential Agni. He is the fury of fire. Taittiriya Samhita 2.2.2.3. Fire is the power of illumination and is concentrated in him. The wild god, the essence of fire, is in the fire, in the waters, in the plants. He has entered all beings. The myth of Dyaus raping his daughter and being divided from her by the violent arrow shot of Rudra Agni, and the spilled semen spawning the ancestors of humans, has parallels in Uranos being castrated by the Rudraic type god Cronus when he approaches to rape Gaia, the Welsh Matholwch giving his wife Branwen an abusive blow, and then Branwen calling the hostile god Efnisien and his brothers to come defeat Matholwch in battle and violently end their marriage, and the Kalash god Mahandev, identical to a title of Vedic Rudra, along with the god of death, dividing the house of the heavens from earth by cutting the strangely white seed chaff-covered cord that connects them with an arrow shot. As we will see, this myth also parallels the myth of Odin attacking and dividing the primordial giant Ymir, and the myth of Ahriman attacking the primordial giant Guyomard with similar outcomes. So to continue our summary of the Vedic myth, Dyaus's seed, which falls to earth, is a fiery seed, creating the ancestors of humans, the fire youths called Angirasas, and also marking the site of the primordial sacrifice. The fallen seed of Dyaus spawning the first human ancestors has parallels in the Greek ash-tree nymphs, the Meliae, being spawned from the drops of blood that fell on Gaia when Uranos was castrated by Cronus, the Phrygian earth-sky hermaphrodite Agdistis, who is castrated and whose fallen blood from the castration lands on the ground and grows into an almond tree that bears an almond that turns into the god Attis, the parallel of Cronus and Rudra. And lastly, to the son of the Welsh father sky, Matholwch, who is named Gwern, his name meaning alder, like the tree, who is then thrown down into a fire by the Rudra-type god Efnisien, when he breaks apart the abusive marriage of Matholwch and Branwen. Thus, the fire seed of Dyaus that falls to the earth and makes the site of sacrifice, and spawns the ancestors of humans, is equivalent to this son of Matholwch, who is named for a tree, and who is thrown into the fire by the Welsh Rudra-type god Efnisien. After Gwern is thrown in the fire, women pregnant with the ancestors of humans are found in caves in the hills. The implication seems to be that Gwern, the tree-named offspring of Father Sky, is entrusted to the fire god and matures in the earth, as in the Iranic version. As the seed of Father Sky is engulfed in flames in the Vedic version, and that this leads to the arising of the human ancestors after a period of time, as if born anew from the earth. In the Iranic version, it is 40 years, during which the seed matures and becomes the rhubarb bush ancestors. This again parallels Ask and Embla, first appearing next to a body of liquid. This body of liquid paralleling the lake of Dyaus's fire seed, or the blood and seed of Uranos that falls in the sea and spawns the tree ancestors. According to the Vedic text Maitrayani Samhita, the first seed that fell was indeed surrounded by fire produced by Agni. Maitrayani Samhita 4.2.12. Exactly like the seed in the Iranic version being guarded by the fire god Neirosang and the fire of Vaharan, exactly like the boy Gwern, who is the tree-named seed of Metholach, being thrown down into the fire by Efnisien. Vastoshpati, a form of Rudra who is the terrifying protector of the house, is given form during the events of the Vedic hymn telling of Dyaus's rape. This Vastoshpati finds its parallel in the Kailash god Mahandev, who, after cutting the seed chaff-covered cord connecting the fortress of the sky to earth, violently bursts into this otherworldly house and kills all the demons therein, thus acting as the cleanser of the house, like Vastoshpati, in the same place as we find this role in the Vedic hymn. And likewise, Efnisien in the Welsh version, during his war against Metholach, enters the special house built to house his giant brother Bran, and with his bare hands kills all 200 men hidden in the house, waiting to ambush them, thus once again acting as the cleanser of the house, Vastoshpati. The match of minute details such as this serves to prove that the division of earth and sky found in the Western European traditions is indeed the exact same myth as that found in the Dyaus daughter rape hymn. Next, in the Vedic hymn, the king is told to bridge the waters with his own body. Verse 16 of hymn 10.61 reads, quote, "This king praised here has been extolled as a ritual adept, and as inspired poet he crosses the waters, creating his own bridge," unquote. Just so, the giant king of the Welsh gods, Bran, literally uses his own body as a bridge over the waters of the river they encounter when they arrive to Ireland to fight Metholach, Father Sky. As he does so, the text reads, quote, "He who will be a chief, let him be a bridge. I will be so," said he, and then was that saying first uttered, and it is still used as a proverb, unquote. This proverb from the myth of Bran and Efnisien fighting Metholach then must come from the same root as the line in the Vedic hymn about Dyaus's rape, showing that this proverb was connected to this specific myth in the original version at the root of both Welsh and Vedic traditions. This is also yet another detail reinforcing the fact that the myth of Bran and Efnisien fighting Metholach is indeed the exact parallel of Rudra shooting Dyaus as he rapes his daughter, and cannot be connected to any other myth in such uncanny detail. In narratives from other Vedic and post-Vedic texts, Rudra Shiva then self-castrates and transcends to his otherworld abode, his sacred mountain, as a symbol of perfection and a model of the path to transcendence, becoming the pillar called Sthanu, an iteration of the world pillar. This has parallels in Efnisien, who self-sacrifices by breaking the cauldron of regeneration at the height of the war and bursting his own heart, presumably attaining a transcendence thereby. Attis, who self-castrates and is said to become perfected and incorruptible thereby, and Cronus, who in Orphic tradition is likewise castrated and then goes to be the ruler of the highest afterlife destination, the Blessed Isles, becoming the guardian and model of transcendent perfection. Lastly, this may parallel Odin as well, who has the mysterious epithet Yalk, Jalk, meaning gelding. We now remind the listener of the crying tears of blood myth we mentioned earlier that belongs to the father sky type, and that this myth also belongs to Guyomars, the epic version of the primordial giant Guyomard of Iranic tradition. Thus, we should investigate how much more from Guyomard aligns with Dyavaprithivi and Dyosh. When we consider Guyomard, who is already treated as the obvious parallel of Ymir by the current academic consensus, we find a figure who is actually replete with the myths of Dyosh that we have so far enumerated. Guyomard is made of two components, earth and the light and brightness of the sky, which is his semen or male essence, and he is made by Ahura Mazda. Thus, Guyomard is nothing but earth and sky elements fashioned by Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda is indeed the mythic equivalent to Prajapati Visvakarman, the fashioner of Dyavaprithivi in the Vedas. Remember that Dyosh's name also technically means bright and functionally signifies the sky or heavens. Thus, the fact that the male essence of Guyomard is made of the brightness of the sky specifically connects it indirectly to Dyosh, the god whose name indicates the brightness of the sky. Likewise, Guyomard's first description is that he is bright, and this may be telling. There is briefly mentioned a sky spirit in the Iranic myth, but it has no myths, only a very brief paragraph mentioning it, followed by the story of Guyomard, whereas Guyomard has all of the myths paralleling the other father sky gods we have so far discussed. Clearly then, this distinction of Guyomard from the spirit of the sky must be a product of the Zoroastrian reforms, which also demonize Rudra as Ahriman in this myth. Guyomard is initially made of earth and sky components, and then, when he dies, his body is also made into the metals of the earth, and his essence goes to the sun, this being the center of the brightness of the sky. This is not identical to Ymir being divided into earth and the heavens, but we can still see in Guyomard a very similar pattern of a division into earth materials and into the essence of bright sky or sun. Ahriman and the demon of death fight and kill Guyomard, much like in the Kalash version, where the Rudra-type god Mahandev, along with the god of death, divide the house of sky and earth by shooting the seed chaff-covered cord that is connecting the two. It takes 30 years for Guyomard to die, as other father sky types such as Bhishma and the Dagda both take a long time to die after being attacked or wounded in their myths, the Dagda also taking several decades. The Bundahisan reads, quote, Ahriman attacked the creations and sent Astvihad, the demon of death, to assail Guyomard, with want, sloth, lust, and 1,000 diseases. Bundahisan 4.19. Time, i.e. Zurvan, had destined him to live for 30 years. Bundahisan 4.25. In the end, Guyomard succumbed to his injuries and passed away. Bundahisan 6f.7. Unquote. Guyomard's seed falls on the earth, his mother, and is received, and also a portion is entrusted to the fire god Neryosang, as Vedic Dyosh's seed had been engulfed by Agni when it fell to earth. The greater Bundahisan says, quote, his, that is Guyomard's, sperm was in 2 parts purified by the rays of the sun, and entrusted for safekeeping to the deity Neryosang, and in 1 part fell upon the earth, and was received by Spandarmad, his creator and mother, i.e. the earth goddess. Unquote. Because the seed of Guyomard then becomes the first ancestors of humans in the form of plant ancestors, rhubarb bushes, this once again parallels the fall of the seed of Dyosh, spawning the fire youth ancestors, the fall of Uranos's blood making the ash tree nymph ancestors, the fall of Agdistis's blood making the almond tree that births Attis, the tree-named offspring Gwern of Matholach being thrown into the fire before the ancestors of humans are discovered in a cave, and finally Ask and Embla being discovered on the shore of a mysterious body of liquid, most logically the lake of seed shed by Father Sky. Neryo Song, the fire god, guards a portion of the seed of Guyomard, and it is explained that this is because the seed of man is said to originate from fire. While the ancestors that arise from Guyomard's seed are in the form of plants, rhubarb bushes, they arise from fire seed under the fire god's protection. Thus, this Iranic version bridges the Vedic version, where the ancestors are fire youths engulfed by Agni, and the other versions, where the ancestors are plant or tree beings. The Iranic version makes the first ancestors plant ancestors with an originating essence of fire, thus both plant and fire ancestors in one. Encyclopedia Iranica summarizes, quote, "His seed remained for 40 years in the earth, out of which slowly grew the rhubarb plant, the stem of which developed into the first human couple, Maishya and Maishyanag." Bundahisin 6f.9. The progenitors of all human races, the 25 in Bundahisin 14.38, species of mankind, Bundahisin 14.1, that inhabit the Zvanira, the central continent of the earth, unquote. Compare this central continent of the earth, where Guyomard's offspring inhabit, to Midgard, which Ymir is also specifically made into. Encyclopedia Iranica continues, quote, "The cause of Guyomard is safeguarded by the fire of Vaharan," Denkard, page 538, because the seed of man is said to have originated from fire, not water, unquote. Again, compare this to the fire youth ancestors of the Vedic version. Ahriman attacks Guyomard on the 1st of Farvardin, called the first day of spring, and of the Iranic solar year, the March equinox marked by the festival of Nowruz, which is Iranic New Year. Stella Cromrish says the myth in which Rudra attacks the father, who is substituted by Prajapati by the time of the Brahmanas, and performs the primordial sacrifice, occurs on this exact date, the spring equinox, the birth of the life of the cosmos and beginning of the Vedic sacrificial year. Quote, "The Vedic sacrificial year began in the spring, at the vernal equinox. On that day, the rising of the sun was announced by a star that appeared at dawn, just before sunrise, and immediately became invisible in the rays of the rising sun. This was the auspicious star for the sacrifice to begin." See Taittiriya Brahmana 1.5.2.1 and commentary. "For the year to begin, a new year in the appointed order of its seasons and their rites," unquote. Quote, "The motion of the vernal equinox, of the beginning of the year, of all rites on which life depended, and which were enacted in the sacrifice, had its myth in the figures of Prajapati and his daughter," unquote. Thus Guyomard is attacked on the same day that corresponds to the myth of Rudra attacking a Prajapati in whom the previously distinct Dyaus and Prajapati have now been conflated. Guyomard impregnates his mother, Earth, as Ahura Mazda had impregnated his daughter, the same earth goddess in each case. This paralleling the overlap of the Prajapati myth of the Brahmanas and the Dyaus myth of the Rig Veda, where each are said to rape their daughter, and there is a lack of clarity about whether this is the earth or dawn goddess, but they could be the same dawn goddess coupled with by both Dyaus and Prajapati on two different levels. That is, the two-level copulation with the daughter/mother goddess of creator Ahura Mazda and his creation Guyomard, in which the earth goddess is inseminated and brings forth fire plant ancestors, is an uncanny match to the two-level copulation with the daughter goddess by the creator Prajapati and his creation Dyosh, in which earth is also inseminated and brings forth fire youth ancestors. Guyomard is killed while juxtaposed to the cosmic cow, as Ymir also is, and I see no reason to doubt the parallel between Ymir and Guyomard in general. As Keyumars is the first lawgiver and model of the just king, so a large section of the Mahabharata involves the incarnation of Dyaus, Bhishma, lying on his deathbed and dispensing a long discourse on Dharma and kingship to the Mitraic king Yudhishthira. The same trait is found in Sarpedon, the epic incarnation of the father sky divinity in the Iliad, who gives a shorter speech on justice, and so we can deduce that some connection to this role was Indo-Iranic and to some degree Proto-Indo-European as well. The relationship between Guyomard and Ahura Mazda offers another angle to look at the question of the daughter of Dyaus, and the relationship between Prajapati and Dyavaprithivi is actually crucial to understand here as a comparison. Dyavaprithivi is the house that Prajapati Visvakarman, the divine craftsman, fashions for himself. It is then like Dyavaprithivi is the heaven-earth material realm in which Prajapati manifests and has his being, while Prajapati is the totality itself and lord of generation, the whole realm of being, clothed in his sky-earth creation that he has made for himself. We can then say that sky-earth is one-dimensionality making up Prajapati, that he fashions and then manifests within. This appears to be why the Orphic cosmic egg, which is itself equivalent to Prajapati as the golden seed or egg called Hiranyagarbha of the Vedas, why this Orphic egg is said to have Uranos and Gaia as its top and bottom shells, sky and earth. The egg as a whole is equal to Prajapati, the totality, Hiranyagarbha, but the top and bottom shell are sky and earth, the material dome housing the egg, and they are divided from one another at the moment the egg itself, as a totality, separates and births its offspring. Then this is roughly the paradoxical relationship between Prajapati and Dyaus, and also between Buri and Ymir, who are the Prajapati and Dyaus, respectively, of Norse myth. If Prajapati generates life from any female principle in his act of creation, it is technically his own daughter internal to him, since everything is created from him. Is it any wonder this event becomes conflated with Dyaus similarly raping his daughter internal to him? These two events follow one another and echo one another purposefully. That is, if Prajapati and Dyaus are two aspects of the same egg, so to speak, one within the other, one of them the clothing or the house of the other, is the daughter not even potentially the same goddess between them? Ushas, for instance, being said to be created by Prajapati, but also to be daughter of Dyaus in different places in the Vedic corpus and Brahmanas. Is the coupling with this daughter happening at the same moment on two levels? And when Rudra shoots to stop it, the division of the egg that occurs is the division of both Prajapati and Dyaus, total egg and shell of egg, respectively. In fact, there is a version of the Iranic myth which reports that Ahriman attacks the cosmic egg where Ahura Mazda is residing. This seems to be an expression of what we have just described. It is my belief that we should keep the Dyaus myth of the Rig Veda conceptually separate from the Prajapati myth, where he couples with his daughter, as these two gods do have their own distinct myths in the earliest texts, and they have the paradoxical relationship I have described. They are not fully reducible to one another, especially in narrative myth, although they overlap. One is the house created by and for the other. These cannot be reduced to one and the same thing. As scholars note, Prajapati has substituted for Dyaus in the Brahmana version of the myth, and in the Brahmana version, Prajapati and his daughter are now said to be in the form of antelopes or deer. Antelopes or deer are the animal shapes specifically connected to Prajapati, not to Dyaus, and in the Rig Veda myth we have discussed, in which the father is instead named Dyaus, no one becomes an antelope or deer. Thus the Vedic myth is not marked by the strong conflation with Prajapati that we see in later texts. Yet we can see why Prajapati and Dyaus become conflated. They are potentially both copulating with the same female on different levels, as do Ahura Mazda and his creation Guyomard, who both procreate with Spandarmad. And they are two aspects of one totality or one egg, so to speak. Is it possible, then, that the Rig Vedic hymn 10.61, which is from the last mandala, is already moving toward the strong conflation that we see in the Brahmanas, where Prajapati gets conflated with his house, that is, Dyavaprithivi, and the father and daughter suddenly appear in the shape of Prajapati's animal, to make clear the conflation has been completed. Could this move toward conflation explain why the female being inseminated by Dyaus is a daughter instead of simply being Earth, or Dyaus's mother, as in the Greek and Iranic versions? Again, Ahura Mazda, who is equivalent to Prajapati, couples with his own daughter, like Prajapati does, except this is the earth emanation, Spandarmad, instead of dawn, as in the Vedic version. Then when Guyomard, who is Dyavaprithivi, is created by Ahura Mazda, Guyomard inseminates this same goddess that Ahura had just coupled with. We then have a very similar two-layered pattern with the Prajapati and Dyaus type figures coupling with the same goddess in succession, this goddess being the daughter of the first but the mother of the second. This detail being consistent with earth goddess Gaia also being the mother of sky Uranus in the Greek version. The Iranic text, the Bundahisan, reads, quote, Guyomard's body was created by Ahura-Mazd from earth, i.e. through Spandarmad, its divinity, thus of the next of kin marriage of father and daughter. The incest is there made very explicit. And his sperm was fashioned from the light and brightness, Zargoni, of the sky. Bundahisan 1a.13, unquote. Quote, his sperm was in two parts purified by the rays of the sun and entrusted for safekeeping to the deity Neryosang, and in one part fell upon the earth and was received by Spandarmad, his creator and mother. Unquote. Certainly people will ask me how exactly Ahura Mazda is Prajapati, and here is a brief summary. Mazda is the Avestan word directly paralleling the Sanskrit Medha, M-E-D-H-A, which is a word that can mean wise, but can also mean the sacrifice, as in the Ashvamedha, while Prajapati is the god who is identified with the sacrifice. Prajapati is the sacrifice. Thus, if a god bears the name Mazda or Medha, it is possible that he is being identified directly with the sacrifice, the Medha. Prajapati is the creator god who is identified with several primordial gods like Agni, Savitar, and Vayu, who are like primary aspects of himself, while Ahura Mazda is the creator god who has his 6 bountiful immortals that aid him in creation and are seen as aspects of himself. Prajapati is the god who invents magic, asceticism, and the rites that defeat death, and he teaches this wisdom to the gods. The other meaning of Mazda is wise, so that he is considered the wise lord, this matching Prajapati as origin of wisdom and rights. Prajapati is identified with his own power of mind or spirit called Manas, which is sometimes distinct from him and sometimes interchangeable with him. Ahura Mazda's primary intermediary in creation is Shpenta Mainyu, which is also treated as an aspect of himself and which indicated essentially the same thing as Manas, Shpenta Mainyu and Manas, the creative spirit or mind. Jan Gonda wrote an entire study comparing the Manas of Prajapati and the Shpenta Mainyu of Ahura Mazda and concluded that they are essentially equivalent concepts. The study is called The Creator and His Spirit. While Prajapati is born in a duality with the waters of chaos and overcomes his nemesis death, which is born of them, and then has a significant rivalry with Rudra, Ahura Mazda, on the other hand, is from the beginning in a duality with Ahriman, the hostile or evil spirit, whose attendant is the demon of death. Thus Prajapati's 2 rivals, Rudra and Death, are equivalent to Ahura Mazda's 2 main rivals, Ahriman and Death. Ahura Mazda and Ahriman are frequently called twins by Zoroaster and others in the Zoroastrian tradition, including being depicted as the twin sons of Time, Zurvan, in the Zurvanite sect, And thus, Ahura Mazda is not the ineffable one that is beyond dualities. He is instead the good half of the first duality, exactly the position we find Prajapati in his duality with the waters of chaos and his rivalry with death and Rudra that carry forward this dynamic. That is, Prajapati is not the absolute Brahman itself. He is one level below the absolute as the manifest form of the Brahman in a duality with the waters of non-being. Similarly to the dual position that Ahura Mazda and Ahriman are in. Ahriman mythically parallels Rudra and Odin, the antagonists of the primordial sky-earth double being in other branches, while Prajapati's main rival or antagonist among the gods is Rudra, who shoots him with his arrow in the Brahmanas, and is also the noted rival of his emanation, Daksha Prajapati, an emanation of Prajapati who emerges from Prajapati's thumb, and continues forward the rivalry with Rudra. As I have noted, Prajapati's other antagonist is death, while death is the attendant of Ahriman that he sends against Ahura Mazda's creation. In sum, Prajapati Visvakarman creates Dyavaprithivi as his home in some sense, although their relationship is paradoxical, and Dyaus's seed becomes the fire ancestors. Likewise, Ahura Mazda is the fashioner of Guyomard from sky and earth materials specifically, whose seed becomes the plant ancestors. Clearly, this is the same pair of gods in each case, thus far sorely misunderstood. As Dyavaprithivi is the house of Prajapati, Ahura Mazda is also said in the Avesta to be, quote, clad in hardest stone, unquote, a reference to the stone sky. See Yasht 30.5. Phrygian Agdistis is one of the closest divinities that we can compare to Guyomard, Agdistis appearing as a double being with half female earth principle and half male principle, the male principle in the case of Agdistis vanishing when Agdistis is castrated, its blood then spawning a tree being. Thus we have another excellent parallel demonstrating how a being with myths closely paralleling Dyavaprithivi can be presented overtly as a hermaphroditic unity. This Agdistis is the parent of Attis, who castrates himself, as Cronus, who is son of Uranos and Gaia, is also castrated in Orphic tradition. Thus Agdistis aligns well with the couple Uranos and Gaia, while yet being in the form of a hermaphroditic double being. The division of earth and sky is one of the most ubiquitous myths in world mythology as a whole, and we can easily note it in Greek, Roman, Vedic, Kalash, and Egyptian myths, among others, and have also discovered it in a cryptic form in Welsh and Irish myths, the myths of Matholwch and Macgrania. So where is the division of earth and sky in the Norse myth? Is Norse mythology stubbornly excluded from this mytheme? Or is the division of the double earth-sky being, Ymir, into earth and sky quite simply the division of earth and sky we see in other traditions? A crucial etymological note that should bring the issue into a new clarity. As Dyavaprithivi is the most well-known double divinity of the Vedas, the root of the name Ymir actually means double, not twin, as is sometimes suggested. The scholar Bruce Lincoln even admits this fact when trying to connect Ymir to a root meaning twin. He says that the name Ymir's Proto-Germanic root is Yumiaz, Y-U-M-I-Y-A-Z, and its Proto-Indo-European root is Ymmios, Y-M-M-I-Y-O-S, and that, quote, this word corresponds to Lettish Jumis, J-U-M-I-S, double fruit, unquote. Although he tries to fudge this connection by comparing it to words not as closely connected to the root of Ymir, and not a formal match to it, which mean twin. These are Irish Emwin, E-M-U-I-N, and Latin Geminus, G-E-M-I-N-U-S. What is closer to Yumiaz, Jumis or Emwin and Geminus? Just from sound alone, we can tell the distance between the first two, meaning double, and the second two, meaning twin. And this is borne out by the fact that the root of Ymir and Jumis are not exact formal matches to the root of Emwin and Geminus. The root of Ymir, in actuality, appears to mean double, a perfect description of what he is, the sky-earth double being, like the double being Dyavaprithivi. Ymir is never a twin in myth, while he is always double, always sky and earth. There is no need to stretch his name to a neighboring meaning that doesn't make sense in his actual myths, when his name already describes his nature perfectly. Thus we should understand that Dyavaprithivi is both a double being and a marriage of two divinities simultaneously, and this explains why some Indo-European mythic traditions depict this sky-earth pair as a double being of some kind. These are Norse, Iranic, Phrygian, and often Vedic, and some depict it as a marriage of two nominally separate deities, these being Greek, Roman, Welsh, and Irish, and sometimes Vedic. In the Vedic version, we can see how the double being form and the marriage of the two gods form are really one and the same thing. Both forms are used in the Vedic version, and they are only two acceptable variations in the outward depiction of the same essential thing, the unity of duality known as Dyavaprithivi, or Dyaus and Prithvi. While Ymir never rapes anyone, he is described as reproducing from the sweat caused by the rubbing together of his limbs. This then implies the same thing as the rape of Dyaus's internal female aspect. In Ymir's case, we have a somewhat disgusting progenitive outburst caused by the friction and heat between two parts of the sky-earth double being. The rubbing together of limbs implies an inner progenitive act, an inner combustion of some kind that causes the production of offspring, and is only different outwardly to the rape version of the myth, almost like a euphemistic version that doesn't want to mention rape, but implies the same underlying event and outcomes. The equivalent of the rape has simply been internalized within the double being Ymir. Indeed, if a sexual act internal to a hermaphroditic unity was going to be depicted, how else would it be described besides two parts of the body of the hermaphrodite rubbing together and producing offspring? Like the other father skies, Ymir is the agent of a somewhat disgusting progenitive urge that bursts the unbroken wholeness of the uncreated cosmos and begins the outflow of material generation, causing the Rudra-type god to attack and divide him from his female half for this act, and to set the chaotic outflow in order. This myth is almost Dyaus's only fleshed-out narrative myth in the Rig Veda, with small exception, and so his identity is very much bound up with it. On the other hand, there is almost no actual fleshed-out narrative myth of Dyaus that aligns well with narrative myths of Odin. Instead, Odin's parallel, Rudra, attacks Dyaus in one of Dyaus's only and most defining myths, directly contrasting and differentiating Rudra and Dyaus in their core mythos. Thus it seems very clear that Rudra and Dyaus were very different gods in their Vedic forms. If Ymir is then the Norse instantiation of the deity known to the Vedics as Dyaus, then no other deity can strictly speaking be the Norse father sky in the same sense that Dyaus is in the Vedas. Neither Odin nor Tyr are the concrete sky itself, nor are they divided from the earth after a procreative outburst or rape in the primordial scene. Odin and Tyr are each something other than this primordial being that is earth plus sky. In some sense, for in the Norse myth, the divider is not one with the divided god. They are differentiated. Rudra is not technically one with Dyavaprithivi, and Odin is technically not one with Ymir. However, the most common confusion that arises around this topic is regarding the colloquial title Sky Father, rather than Father Sky. The more loosely applied term, the Sky Father, may not mean precisely Dyaus, or Father Sky, the concrete sky and name of a specific divinity within Indo-European myth. Sky Father generally derives from the concept of Zeus as the sovereign of sky, but Zeus, again, is arguably only an inheritor of elements and some myths from the primordial Dyaus type. He is, as I would argue, Mitraic in his original core mythic essence. Odin is indeed the inheritor of Ymir's domain, the sky, acting as the great king of the sky in his Varuna aspect. It is evidently in this Varunian aspect that he is consort of the now distinct earth goddess, Yorth. Just as the incarnation of the Vedic Varuna, Pandu, is consort of the incarnation of the Vedic earth goddess, Prita. From the pairing of Odin and Yorth is produced Thor, the thunderer, while Arjuna, incarnation of the thunderer Indra, is produced from the pairing of this Varunian Pandu and the earth incarnation Prita. And this is then the parallel we should look to with regard to the coupling of Odin and Yorth. As Dumasil has shown, the epic incarnations of gods found in the Mahabharata often preserve more archaic forms of the divine genealogy. Thus the family of Pandu and Prita may preserve a more archaic image of the original pantheon as it would align with the Norse pantheon. For no violence nor separation occurs in the relationship of Odin and Yorth, as their coupling does not take place in the primordial scene, as with Dyavaprithivi. Varuna himself, however, is a bringer of rains from the clouds and the celestial ocean above. He is a fecundator and a bull who rains down upon earth, and he is both a father and a first sovereign of the skies in the chronology of the cycle. This Varunian role would well explain the relationship of Odin and Yorth, earth, which is the relationship of the rain-bringing sovereign to the earth within the cycle of unfolding time rather than in the primordial moment. Rudra, the one who disciplines and sets right the act of Dyaus, is also arguably an even higher god than Dyaus or Varuna in the Vedas, and comparative evidence, with European branches at least, would suggest that he may have even had a preeminent position in the earliest Proto-Indo-European pantheon. This, of course, remains open to debate. In sum, if we accept Ymir as the Norse father sky, then Norse myth has essentially every piece of the Indo-European creation myth, as seen in other branches. If not, then the Norse creation myth is a curious outlier from essentially all other branches. The comparativist scholar Nick J. Allen explains his theory of how Zeus only inherited the title and some aspects from the Proto-Indo-European father sky type deity. Quote, "The Proto-Indo-European family of gods included two important males who were 2 generations apart. The grandfather, called Dyaus, personified heaven or sky, while the grandson was presumably linked with a part of the cosmos that was less remote. Indra is regularly associated with the atmosphere, understood as situated between heaven and earth. Within the myth, the grandfather was in some sense replaced by the grandson, who became king of the gods. However, during the history of the Greek tradition, the grandson, speaking of Zeus, took over the grandfather's name." Unquote. I agree with Allen's main point, but he believes that Zeus is directly comparable to Indra, which is valid on the surface level in my view, but I side with Dumasil in seeing Zeus as more Mitraic in his original essence, aligned with the god Mitra. Either way, Zeus must have inherited the title and some connected roles and mythemes from the archaic Uranos/Dyaus type, as Zeus also swallows his predecessor, Phanes, and takes prerogatives of Poseidon and his father Cronus, becoming the great inheriting and culminating sovereign of the sky father, although not father sky, the sky itself. We can also see that in the course of Greek religion, Zeus becomes identified with the Prajapati principle, the totality, which is everything, the cosmic egg itself. This, however, relates to his culmination rather than his originating essence, which is Mitraic. The name Zeus, when seen in relation to Zeus, implies that he is the greatest sovereign of the sky, who has some roles taken from the primordial concrete father sky. It does not mean he is the sky itself. When the name Dyaus is applied to Dyaus, it implies that he is the concrete bright sky itself, as is made clear hundreds of times in the Vedas, just as the name Uranos has the same literal meaning when applied to Uranos. There is an example from Mesopotamian mythology that allows us to see an explicit case of how the sovereignty of the sky can be passed down from one god to the next, and how a title connecting to the sky god's name can be a part of this inheritance. This involves Anu, the Mesopotamian god who is the sky itself, and who is divided from earth, Ki, thus the direct equivalent of Dyaus or Uranos. Like Dyaus and Uranos, Anu does not maintain his role as the king of gods or father of gods. This role is able to be passed down as Anutu, or Anu power, the power of Anu, i.e. the power of heaven. In one creation myth, Anu's power, Anutu, is passed to Enlil, who is the divider of sky and earth, and then later it is passed to Enki's son Marduk, a Varunian-type parallel. They become in turn the de facto head of the pantheon. This Anutu, or heaven power, is described as being passed down to humans as well, specifically to kings who are depicted in Mesopotamian art wearing Anu's crown. It seems clear that some sort of similar theology existed in the Greek mythology and religion, and probably in Indo-European religion generally, if not always as clearly stated. If we do not begin to recognize these subtle yet simple theological principles, we will continue to be confused by how the multiple distinct but overlapping sovereigns of the sky function in our own mythologies. Zeus has the Dyaus or Dyaus power of sky sovereignty, so to speak, it having been passed down to him from the original Uranos-type god, despite the fact that Zeus originates as a separate god type. Additionally, Anu is the father not only of gods, but also of evil spirits and demons, most prominently the demoness Lamashtu, who preys on infants. One of the functions of these demons was apparently to keep humans in check. Although this is a Mesopotamian example, it illustrates the principle that the sky god can, without contradiction, be aligned with negative or evil forces, exactly as we see Ymir portrayed as father of the Jotnar and bearing an evil reputation. If we thought that a sky god could not be aligned with demons or evil forces, this example will have disproven that. If we are being accurate, Ymir is the heavens and sky itself, and the earth itself. He is Dyavaprithivi, sky earth or heaven earth, and his head or male principle is Dyosh, the concrete sky divided from his feminine half, earth, by the Rudra-type god Odin in the primordial moment. The goddess of his separated body, the earth, is then called by the name Yorth, and is Mother Earth, but the sky remains the head of Ymir in the creation myth and in skaldic poetry. Thus he and no other are equivalent to Dyosh. He and no other are called the sky itself. Indeed, we know that Ymir is the heavens and concrete sky themselves, because the poetic sources spell this out multiple times. He is nothing beyond heavens and earth, and nothing else in the corpus is said to be the sky. In the poetic Edda text, Vafthrûdnir's verses 20 to 21, we read, quote, Odin spake, First answer me well, if thy wisdom avails, and thou knowest it, Vafthrûdnir, now. In earliest time, whence came the earth, or the sky, thou giant sage? Vafthrûdnir spake, Out of Ymir's flesh was fashioned the earth, and the mountains were made of his bones, the sky from the frost-cold giant's skull, and the ocean out of his blood. Unquote. Grimnir's verses 40 to 41 are also in close agreement. Quote, Of Ymir's flesh was earth created, of his blood the sea, of his bones the hills, of his hair trees and plants, of his skull the heaven, and of his brows the gentle powers formed Midgard for the sons of men. But of his brain the heavy clouds are all created. Unquote. Thus we see Ymir is, specifically, the elements of earth, the heavens, and the clouds. Dyosh is the concrete sky itself, the heavens, his name often translated as Father Heaven. Can it be denied from the above that when a Norse person would look up at the sky, they would see the head of Ymir and nothing else, with the rain-bringing clouds as his brains. Snorri's Skald Skaparmal says that the skaldic kennings for the sky are Ymir's skull, Jotun's skull, and burden of the dwarfs, the dwarves being the ones who hold it in place. Thus, the question of what is the concrete sky in the Norse tradition is beyond doubt. Now, clearly, compared to Vedic Dyosh or Iranic Guyomard, Ymir had been somewhat demonized. The compiler Snorri Sturluson, writing during the Christian era, writes in his Gylfaginning that, quote, Jafnhar answered, "By no means do we acknowledge him God. He was evil, and all his kindred. We call them rime giants." Unquote. But note that Dyaus is actually portrayed as partly negative, or at least ambivalent in the Vedic corpus. By contrast, the Purusha is not portrayed as even slightly negative, but is purely extolled. Perhaps Dyaus's central myth involves him raping his daughter and having to be shot by the policeman of cosmic order, Rudra Agni. He is undeniably an incestuous rapist in myth. Obviously, we cannot reduce this cosmic act to evil when we understand it esoterically, since it is simply the procreative act that gives life to the cosmos, and it has a high metaphysical significance. Still, it is logical that such a raping father could be seen negatively if the myth were taken a bit more literally. Stella Kramrisch insists that the real crime of Dyaus is that he is spending the sacred substance of the uncreate, the sacred liquid, into existence, and thereby is rupturing the pre-cosmic state of perfect wholeness. Although this is a crucial metaphysical event for the creation of the cosmos, it could still be portrayed as a great crime in a literalist understanding, since Rudra has to avenge the spending of the sacred liquid and set things right. In the story of Uranos, Uranos is also portrayed as a frightful, abusive husband to Gaia, who must be rescued from him by her Rudraic son, Cronus, just before Uranos rapes her. If taken literally, this also does not paint the deified sky as purely positive. Matholwch of the Welsh tradition likewise gives Branwen a great abusive blow and forces her to labor in the kitchens until she sends for her Rudraic brother Efnisien and Bran to rescue her from Matholwch. Once again, Matholwch, Father Sky, is not portrayed as purely good within the simple mythic narrative. He is ambivalent and potentially negative if we read too literally. The same sort of literal reading evidently is what shifted Ymir from the divinely ambivalent progenitive sky-earth unity to an evil being in the writings of the late compiler Snorri Sturluson. Calling Ymir evil is merely the logical conclusion of his noted violent traits, his connection to rough materiality and the potentially disgusting, uncontrolled progenitive urge, his parentage of rough beings such as the Jotnar, his origin from venom, and his spending of the sacred substance of the pre-cosmic state in his progenitive actions. But we must keep in mind that only Snorri took Ymir to the logical conclusion of this literalist reading by actually calling him evil. The earlier poetic sources that Snorri was drawing from do not seem to claim Ymir to be evil. He appears ambivalent there, frightening or disgusting even. Sky simply must be divided from earth. There is no deeper demonization against the sky needed for Odin to divide it from earth and make it level, and Ymir's crime of spending the sacred substance must simply be avenged and set right. It is entirely possible that other regional Germanic traditions that we have lost didn't at all demonize Ymir, or that even the tradition of Snorri's region kept a more neutral view of him before Snorri's time. If, however, the entire Germanic world did demonize Ymir, it would still not be far out of line with the portrayal of the abusive Welsh Matholwch, of Uranos as rapist, or indeed with Dyaus when considered as the rapist, who by his sexual urge commits the monumental sin of breaking the integrity of the pre-cosmic wholeness that Rudra sought to keep intact. Perhaps in this moment when rough materiality enters the world, certain forms of evil also were seen to enter the world in Germanic tradition. From whatever angle you look at it, Dyaus and his equivalents disrupt order, and Rudra is the keeper of order. It is relatively common that a god that is treated positively in one Indo-European tradition may become demonized in another. we must remember that every time someone accepts the parallel of Ymir with the Iranic Guyomard, they are accepting that the Norse tradition partly demonizes this figure, and that the Iranic tradition lifts him up as a holy being and model of kingship. No matter what, one tradition is presenting the Ymir/Guyomard type in an opposite light compared to the other. In the current situation of comparative mythology, as it is already generally accepted, someone here is flipping the value of this divinity type from positive to negative in comparison with the other branch, either Ymir or Guyomard. Saying the Norse could not have demonized their version of Dyosh or seen him as ambivalent, at the very least, is demanding far more than we have control of. The evidence presented suggests that Snorri did so, and that the Poetic Edda made him ambivalent or somewhat negative, and we have no say in whether they did so or not. We should not have emotional attachments to how we want the mythology to be. We should follow where the evidence leads to reach the truth. I have been called a heretic for simply presenting the truth of the theology of the Indo-European tradition and being precise about Ymir. And there is a strong general attachment that exists right now to an understanding of Ymir that is in error. There is no need to get hung up on the fact that the West considered their version of the Dyaus-type god to be ambivalent, or minor, or otiose, or even sometimes negative, when the tradition became simplified to a more literalist understanding. Why be up in arms about Vedic Dyaus if he doesn't belong to your specific tradition? In similar fashion, Indra, Rudra, and the Gandharva are demonized by the Iranics, while on the other hand, Varuna gets grouped with the demonized Asuras in later Vedic tradition. Some Celts in Gaul apparently considered the Thunderer to be stupid, according to a Roman commentator. Christian-era descriptions of Crom Cruach paint him as an evil demon, but there is evidence his may have been a name of the chief god of Ireland originally. On such a touchy subject, we should be very hesitant to trust the judgment of Snorri that Ymir was truly evil, at least until we understand the full comparative picture relating to Ymir. There are two difficult to answer questions that summarize the case. From those who reject my premise, I have yet to get a straight answer on these. Dyavaprithivi is objectively sky-earth. Who is the Norse sky-earth? Is anything but Ymir sky, and is Ymir anything more than sky or heavens and earth? The Vedic divinity called the Purusha, intentionally or unintentionally, is often used as a smokescreen against clarity on these questions. But the Purusha is said in the Purusha Sukta of the Rig Veda to be, quote, all that yet hath been and all that is to be, unquote, and to contain all the immortals as only a fraction of himself. The Purusha is the whole realm of being, both material and immaterial, and so it is no match for the limited sky-earth unity that is Ymir. The Purusha also does not rub against itself to create offspring, while Dyosh rapes a female divinity apparently internal to himself and inseminates his own other half, Earth, this being much closer to what Ymir does when he rubs himself together and procreates. The Purusha thus offers no valid alternative in answering these questions for anyone who has read the Purusha Sukta. So here are the specific reasons Ymir has to be the parallel of Dyavaprithivi and simply cannot be the Purusha. Ymir's name means double, and the Purusha is never connected to any concept of doubleness, while Dyavaprithivi is the primary double divinity of the entire Veda. Ymir rubs together disgustingly to reproduce, while the Purusha never has any physically described reproductive act involving things such as friction of limbs and bodily fluids. Indeed, the Purusha is a highly extolled figure embracing the complete totality, and there would seemingly be no reason to even partly demonize him, while Dyosh, on the other hand, a more limited figure, is a rapist of his daughter, and is the one who is guilty of breaking the wholeness of the uncreate with his shocking procreative act. Thus there is far more basis for why Dyosh could be seen as ambivalent or negative, like Ymir, compared to the Purusha, a much purer divinity concept. Ymir is divided by the Rudra-type god Odin and his two brothers specifically. the division event where Rudra is the violent divider is very specific and is directed toward Dyosh in the Rig Veda and no other. Thus the fact that Odin is the Rudra-type god aligns the attackers very precisely in this case, and does not align with the Purusha Sukta. We can also confidently deduce that Odin, Hymir, and Lothar, the three brothers, are Rudra, Shiva, and Agni, because the Welsh myth has a directly parallel scene to the one where Odin, Lothar, and Hymir find Ask and Embla, the tree-named ancestors. This is when the Rudraic god Efnisien, his peaceful brother Nisien, and their half-brother, the Agni equivalent Manawydan, meet Gwern, meaning alder, that is the tree-named son of Matholach, who is Father Sky. Because Efnisien, meaning unpeace, his brother Nisien, meaning peace, and their brother Manawydan, the fire god, are much easier to decode and must be Rudra, Shiva, and Agni. This tells us that the parallel scene in the Norse myth is probably also the same trio, first meeting the tree ancestors. This is further supported by the fact that it is Rudra Agni who attacks Dyaus in the Vedic version. The other details we know of Lothar and Hymir also support their identifications with Agni and Shiva in particular. Ask and Embla are found directly after the killing of Ymir on the shore of a body of liquid, which must have spawned them, and which must then be the lake of seed from the just divided Father Sky. The figure who has just been cut in two at this point is of course Ymir. Thus it would be ridiculous not to connect these and to conclude that Ymir is the equivalent of Dyavaprithivi, the producer of the lake of fluid that spawns the tree ancestors upon being divided in two. As we have repeated, Ymir is made only into earth and the heavens. His scope is far more limited compared to the Purusha, and these are the defining parameters of what he is. Just as the defining parameters of what the Purusha is are that it is all that is or ever will be, the entire realm of being, past, present, and future. Guyomard is Ymir's widely accepted parallel, and his name means mortal life. And it is specifically said that he is made only into material things. Thus Guyomard, the parallel of Ymir, is explicitly the source only of material and mortal things, while the Purusha includes all immortal and immaterial things as well. And this is crucial to what it is. Without this element, it would no longer be the Purusha. We can't brush aside such specifically defined limitations as they constitute what these two different deity types are and why they exist at all in the first place. The Bundahisen 3.12 reads, quote, Guyomard, the preeminent element of material beings. Unquote. We can indeed say that Ymir, as Sky-Earth, is a part of the Purusha, which itself is a greater totality, and this is why their divisions are echoes of one another. Echoes of myths, or of certain descriptions on different levels of manifestation, are very common in mythology. If one line of description closely echoes another, this does not make them the same thing or from the same root mythos automatically, and we have to understand what they are in detail and in context to grasp this. Each figure, Ymir and the Purusha, has a specific mythos and theological role, a specific reason it exists at all. The Purusha has to be all that is or ever will be to have any meaning as Purusha. Without this definition and these traits, it vanishes as a divine being. It is its entire purpose. This purpose is negated if equated with the limited sky-earth. Ymir is a part of the Purusha in the same way everything else is. He is a fraction of it, the sky-earth portion that is mentioned to originate from the Purusha on a higher level. The portion of the Purusha described as sky and earth only takes up one verse of a 16-verse hymn which tells of all the other immortal and immaterial things that the Purusha is, ultimately reaching beyond what Ymir can extend to. We can see that besides Ymir, there are other valid double being forms of the sky-earth unity, these being Guyomard, Agdistis, and often Dyavaprithivi, when treated as such. Thus this double being form is equally valid as the form where sky and earth are a nominally distinct married couple. the myths of both types remain consistent across the board, and thus they are two different forms of the same double divinity. Lastly, the Purusha is said to give birth or to emanate both Viraj and Prajapati, who are the equivalents of Audumbla and Buri. Viraj being the primordial form of the cosmic cow, and Prajapati being technically the grandfather of Rudra by the intermediary of his auto-generated offspring, Kama/Manu, as Buri is grandfather of Odin by the intermediary of his auto-generated offspring, Bor. What I mean is, the genealogy from Prajapati to Rudra is the same as that from Buri to Odin. There are 3 generations, beginning with the father of generation, ending with the Rudraic god, and with an intermediary divinity who in Vedic myth is Kama or Manu. In Vedic it is Prajapati, his auto-generated offspring Kama Manu, who gives rise to Rudra. In Norse it is Buri, his auto-generated offspring Bor, and then Odin. This strongly points to Buri being equivalent to Prajapati. So Purusha emanates Viraj, Prajapati, and Dyavaprithivi, among other things, and all of the immortals, each one only as a fraction of its far-embracing totality. Clearly, only that which is the source of Audumbla, Buri, and Ymir could accurately be compared to the Purusha, if there even was such a specifically defined concept as the Purusha to be found in Norse myth at all. The Purusha is practically, though slightly distinct from, the Brahman itself in the Vedic corpus, while a Brahman parallel is also not very clearly delineated in Norse myth. The Purusha is also closer to Prajapati than it is to Dyavaprithivi, so much so that sometimes the Purusha and Prajapati are identified. And so technically Buri would be closer to the Purusha than Ymir is, but again there exists a distinction in some of the texts. Trying to fit the truly all-embracing totality called the Purusha into Ymir, who is heavens and earth, is like having a puzzle piece the shape of the United States, and a puzzle piece the shape of a star, and then trying to fit the United States-shaped piece into the star-shaped hole, because the United States piece can also cover the star-shaped hole well enough, and because the flag of the United States does have stars on it, although the United States-shaped piece can't truly slot into place. This is excessive, lacking both precision and intellectual rigor, and it fails Occam's razor when there exists a much more specific match between Ymir and Dyavaprithivi in almost every detail of their narrative myths. Equating the Purusha with Ymir is like having a set of Russian dolls, one fitting within the other, and saying that the largest one is the same thing as the middle one. A Russian doll fallacy, so to speak, since there is a much more precise parallel for Ymir, and one which does not attempt to stretch him into being the entire totality like the Purusha is. I have been determined to be precise about Ymir, and to thoroughly drive the magnitude of this correspondence home. It seems to me that no one has dared to be precise about Ymir thus far, as they have not been armed with all of the parallels necessary to make the comparison definitive. People, it seems, far prefer to compare him to what he does not perfectly match, the Purusha, rather than what he does perfectly match, Dyavaprithivi. In some ways, it is easier to be less precise and to compare him to the Purusha, rather than to name Ymir as the equivalent of the great Dyaus Pitar, even though this is accurate. The mythic pattern we have laid out harmonizes 9 Indo-European branches: Vedic, Iranic, Welsh, Gaelic, Greek, Roman, Kalash, Phrygian, and Norse. In these branches, we have 3 different versions, where the sky-earth unity is a hermaphrodite or double being of some kind: Phrygian Agdistis, Iranic Guyomard, and Vedic when Dyavaprithivi is treated as such a double being. Thus we can see that the marriage of earth and sky can be depicted as either a marriage of nominally separate deities or a double being that contains their unity. Each of these narrative forms are acceptable forms of the same myth, as all of the surrounding mythic details show us. With Ymir included, This makes 4 of 9 branches that use the double being form of the myth, at least to some degree. Thus, it is not uncommon at all. The sky-earth unity was apparently seen by the early Indo-Europeans as a paradoxical double divinity that could be conceptualized as a single hermaphroditic unity or a marriage of 2 nominally distinct deities with equal validity, or even both at the same time, as the Vedic case sometimes suggests. How a given branch chose to represent this double marriage is only a surface-level issue, however, while the core essence of the divinity remains the same between each branch and each representation. Now that we have gone through the details, we can quickly summarize how the narrative details of each branch align. Vedic Dyavaprithivi is a double being created by Prajapati Visvakarman as his house. Dyosh rapes his daughter, who Kramrish asserts is internal to him because the moment of division and differentiation has not yet occurred, and Rudra Agni shoots him with an arrow and divides him from the daughter, possibly on spring equinox. Dyosh's semen falls into the womb of the earth goddess, his other half, and spawns the fire youths, the first ancestors of humans. A lake of Dyosh's semen is left behind. This dividing of Dyosh from his daughter is referred to as, quote, the well-performed sacrifice, unquote, and the fallen semen marks the site of the sacrifice. Rudra's Vastoshpati form is manifested, the terrifying protector of the house. The king is told to be the bridge over the waters. In separate tales of Rudra Shiva, during the creation time, he goes into the waters, meditates, and castrates himself, becoming known as Stanu, the pillar. He then retires to his sacred mountain to meditate, an image of the axis mundi and of transcendent perfection. Kailash Mahandev, a title of Rudra, and the god of death, shoot an arrow and sever the white seed chaff-covered cord connecting the house of the sky to earth, an apparent euphemism for Dyosh's penis from the Vedic version. This act divides the house of sky from earth. Mahandev then breaks into the house of sky and violently cleanses the demons there and releases the sun, thus acting as protector of the divine house like Vastoshpati. Iranic Guyomard is composed of 2 elements, the brightness of the sky and earth. He is made by Ahura Mazda, who parallels Prajapati, maker of Dyavaprithivi, and his mother is Spandarmad, the earth goddess. He is attacked by Ahriman and the demon of death. His semen falls onto earth, his own mother, and spawns the rhubarb plant ancestors of humans, Maishya and Maishyanag. It is said that the seed of humans is also guarded by fire and is of the essence of fire. Guyomard's body is made into the earth's metals and is the source of material creation, and his spirit goes to the sun. His name means mortal life, indicating that he is the source of mortal and not immortal life. The version of Guyomard found in the epic poem Shahnameh, named Keomars, cries tears mixed with blood for his dead son, paralleling 3 other father sky-type figures, that is, the Daga, Bhishma, and Zeus. Greek Uranos, Father Heaven, is about to rape Gaia, the earth, when her son, Cronus, who she had summoned to help her, attacks Uranos and castrates him. Blood and semen fall from his testicles, and the blood spawns the ash tree nymphs, the tree form first ancestors of early humans. In Orphic tradition, Cronus then is castrated, and when he is deposed, he becomes the ruler of the Blessed Isles, the highest afterlife destination, thus paralleling Rudra Shiva retiring to his sacred mountain after self-castrating. In a myth tracking closely to the plot and details of the Greek and Vedic versions, Welsh Matholach physically abuses his wife Branwen, and so she calls her brothers, the Rudraic bringer of strife, Efnisien, his explicitly peaceful brother, Nisian, their fire god brother, Manawydan, and the eventual severed head god of death and the underworld, Bran, to rescue her. During their war on Matholach, Efnisien, Nisian, Manawydan, and Bran greet the tree-named son of Matholach and Branwen, that is, Gwern. Efnisien throws Gwern into the fire, as the seed of Dyosh similarly falls and is surrounded by fire after Rudra shoots Dyosh. The ancestors of humans are subsequently found in the hills, presumably born from the earth that is impregnated by the fall of Gwern into the fire. Efnisien violently kills with his bare hands the 200 ambushers hidden in the special house built for Bran by Matholach, thus once again acting as the defender of the divine house, matching Vastoshpati, and again just like Kalash Mahandev also does. When they first arrive to fight Matholach, the king, Bran, uses his giant body as a bridge over the waters of a river, and it is said that this event becomes a proverb relating to kingship, wherein the king is told to make himself a bridge over the waters, exactly like the demand that the king become a bridge over the waters in the Dyaus rape hymn of the Rig Veda. Efnisien goes into the waters of the cauldron of regeneration and self-sacrifices by bursting his own heart, the site of the passions, and thus a euphemism for the self-castration and transcendence as found in the Rudra Shiva myth. Efnisien also is the one who incites the war and then tries to set it right, closely matching the dynamic of Rudra Agni as described by Kramrish, who she says first incites Dyaus's passion and then avenges the act with his arrow shot. Irish Rudra-type god, Eivor Finn, and his brothers break up the marriage of Eriu, Mother Earth, and her primordial husband, Macgrania, with a war. Eivor Finn becomes king of half of Ireland until being killed. Ith, the parallel of Althumbla, as Viraj Vak in the Vedas, is killed by the men of Macgrania, possibly parallel to Althumla's milk being consumed by Ymir, or the Gav being killed right next to Guyomard, or Viraj also being ritually killed in the Atharva Veda. Phrygian Agdistis is a hermaphroditic being who is tricked into castrating itself. When its male member is removed, what is left is treated as the earth and mountain goddess. Thus we can presume its male essence was related to sky, the opposite of earth. The blood that falls from the castration forms an almond tree. An almond from the tree becomes Attis, who castrates himself and is said to become perfected and incorruptible by the act, as when Rudra becomes the pillar, Stanu, or when Cronus transcends and becomes ruler of the highest afterlife after being castrated. Thus, as the self-castrating Rudra-type god and tree-born offspring of the fallen castration blood, Attis appears to be a conflation of the Cronus type and the tree-form ancestor type, these both being two different offspring of Uranos, sky, in the Greek case. But in the case of Attis, he is the offspring of a hermaphroditic double being that is earth plus a male principle, probably sky. This is another illustration that the primordial hermaphrodite types directly parallel the sky-earth marriage types, such as Uranos and Gaia. Lastly, Norse Ymir is a giant whose name means double. He is apparently a hermaphrodite that reproduces by disgustingly rubbing its limbs together, which then parallels Dyaus raping the internal female aspect of himself. Ymir is divided into earth and heavens, and nothing more, by Odin, Heinir, and Lother, as Efnisien, Nisien, and Manawyddan confront the tree-named offspring of Matholach in the Welsh myth. Odin, Heinir, and Lother are the ones who find the tree-named ancestors, Ask and Embla, next to a body of liquid in the Norse myth, which is logically the lake of fallen seed from Father Sky, again most logically being the outflow of Ymir, who has just been cut apart. Because Odin, Heinir, and Lother parallel Efnisien, Nisien, and Manawyddan so directly in this specific case, and because Efnisien, Nisien, and Manawyddan are much more clearly Rudra, Shiva, and Agni, we can deduce that Odin, Heinir, and Lother are likewise this trio, Rudra, Shiva, and Agni, the three primary aspects of the Rudra-type god, the flame and the destructive and peaceful luminosity of the flame, esoterically speaking. This also reasonably matches the fact that it is Rudra Agni who attacks Dyaus in the Vedic myth. One of Odin's names is Yalk, meaning gelding, implying that he likely originally had a castration myth like the other Rudraic gods, Rudra, Cronus, Attis, and Efnisien as well in a mutated form. The case should now be simple. You can't have the violent division of earth and sky by the Rudra-type god, with the subsequent mysterious emission of tree ancestors, and have this be a separate myth from that of the Dyaus-type god, the father sky who is the concrete sky. We have too many branches of evidence confirming this pattern now, and only ignorance of these branches, in particular the Celtic and Kalash branches, can leave space for denial. Ymir, hermaphroditically reproducing by rubbing himself together, has no parallels in any of the other Vedic dividing myths, besides the rape of Dyaus' daughter by Dyaus. Not the Purusha division, or the division of sky from earth by Indra or Varuna. As we probably should have seen when we were children, sky is sky. Our ancestors were communicating clearly in this important regard and were not confused. They wanted to speak clearly and be understood. Sky is sky and ever remains so. Dyaus remains Uranos, and these remain the head of Ymir. Dyaus was always Otios to some degree, and not the most central focus of worship. There is no evidence that shows otherwise. Although they do have some key roles, quote, heaven and earth never attained to a living personification or importance in worship, as MacDonald concludes. Thus Ymir, like Dyaus, is roughly as he always was and needs no excusing. Ymir is the primordial sky who recedes from the scene and becomes the Otios rain giver we see when we look above us, the clouds. He is thanked for what he continues to give in that role. He is seen as dubious for being the one who broke the integrity of primordial wholeness by reproducing with his inner female aspect, thereby ushering in rough materiality that then had to be shaped and put in order by Odin. The idea that sky, Ymir's skull, is simply sky, Dyaus, argues for far fewer changes to have happened over time within the Norse mythology compared to all other theories of who the Norse father sky is. It also explains all of the data more fully than any other theory. If Ymir is accepted as father sky, then the Norse creation myth, as we have it in the Eddas, can be shown to be almost unchanged compared to the Proto-Indo-European creation myth. If Ymir is rejected as father sky, a whole list of changes and fantastical excuses have to be postulated to explain why Norse mythology is such a curious outlier from other branches. By Occam's razor, this solution should be accepted then. For those who disagree, I ask, who is the Norse sky-earth, the concrete sky and earth themselves, in a unity? Is anything but Ymir sky, and is Ymir anything more than sky or heaven and earth? Despite its simplicity, the fact that sky has always been sky will still be hard to accept for many. However, if you do accept it, you will be among a rare number, those who know Dyaus. If you are following closely, then you will have already begun to see many of the holes in the popular Ymo and Manas creation myth theory. If time permits, in a follow-up video, I will demonstrate all the specific flaws in that theory. It should be clear from this video that a complete alternate theory is available and fleshed out, and is the only theory that harmonizes every available branch and explains all of the data most fully and parsimoniously. A thank you to my friend and colleague Josephus for first pointing out that Ymir's name means double, and explaining to me the linguistics showing that it does not formally match words meaning twin. I also must credit Josephus for pointing out that Ahura Mazda's name can indicate the sacrifice. Thank you to everyone who has contributed to this research by discussing these topics with me. My book, Taliesin's Map, The Comparative Guide to Celtic Mythology, is available from Amazon. Link in the description.